It's not about what we do in those moments, because that kind of stuff can really drive us mad, where we're like, I need to be this perfect parent who is like really responsive and aware of this and that. And that's just not sustainable, because at the end of the day, we're human. And in the same ways that our parents tried their best, we're still trying our best. But I think the bigger piece is, how are we going back and doing that repair work with them in the now, in the moment? And how are we having the conversations and not sweeping it under the rug, right? Because there are going to be days where we lose our cool, we lose our patience, and our old trauma comes back and gets us, and we are triggered by something. But there's always going to be those cool down moments, those moments that we may not have had with our parents, or we did, in the form of like, do you want oranges now?
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how much parenthood could change a marriage. If flirting, laughing, and having fun together feels like a thing of the past, then I'm here to teach you that marriage doesn't have to feel so hard with your parents, and your marriage can thrive even when you're in the season of raising kids. Whether you're in a good place in your marriage and you just want to continue growing together, or you're wondering if you even like your spouse anymore, this podcast has something for you. Join me here each week as we dive into what it takes to help your marriage grow, and maybe even do a 180. You'll learn ways to handle conflict better, bring that spark back into your relationship, as well as learn how to improve other areas of your life from my lovely guest experts. Are you ready for the next stage of your life and marriage? Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood podcast. This episode is not like any I've done before, and it has a very, very special place in my heart, because we're going to be talking about generational trauma and the cultural impact that it has on motherhood and marriage. And if you've never met me before or seen my face, I'm Asian American. Okay, so this plays a huge part of my own personal experience in becoming a mom, in being a wife. And so I am so thrilled to have Peggy Chen here. She's the co-host of Healing the Tigress podcast, licensed clinical social worker and certified perinatal mental health therapist. And fun fact, we have a mutual friend. When I was in Vegas with my girls, my friend Jackie was like, you need to meet my neighbor, Peggy. And I was like, let's do it. So welcome, Peggy. I'm so excited to get into this with you and dive into this like very, very deep topic and see where we go from here. So before we get started, can you share with us where you live, how old your kids are, and why you decided to do what you do?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. And it's so funny because we've done 20 plus episodes and I've never been a guest on a podcast. So it's like, oh, switching gears. How do I do this? But I'm really glad to be here.
To have you.
I think you are my first podcast that I get to be a guest on. I've never done this before. So this is really exciting. So I am in the Bay Area, California, and I have one little one who is 4 years old. And I have worked in mental health for years. I actually have my bachelor's in psychology, and I straight out of undergrad went straight to working in my first like real job out of undergrad was with a mental health outpatient clinic. And so I've like lived and breathed mental health for as long as I can remember. And then I took a short stint in the health tech space because, as you know, being a social worker has a really high burnout rate, but I was still touching healthcare and working with other clinicians. But before that, I did outpatient mental health. I did inpatient psychiatry. Just mental health was my bread and butter. And at some point, I felt like I was losing touch with it, which is where the podcast Healing the Tigress was born, of wanting to find a way to dive back into that. And luckily, my co-host Jasmine, who is a clinical pharmacist, had shared her postpartum depression story. And I remember feeling really inspired by her vulnerability and sharing it, and, you know, being a face that is not really seen in these circles. For her, it was also not being able to see other people who look like her in those spaces of like, okay, why are there not other Asian American mothers sharing their postpartum experience? And it kind of makes you feel alone. Like, am I doing something wrong? So that's how Healing the Tigress was born. And it was a way for me to step back into mental health while still working in corporate America. And then just something clicked in the past year where I was like, I can't keep doing this work and not feeling like I can give my all to mental health. So there was a pivotal moment. We had a guest on our podcast, Dr. Kalena Luneza, who is a native Hawaiian psychiatric nurse practitioner. And she shared in her episode about how at the end of the day, she works with other native Hawaiian mothers and other folks that are Pacific Islander, how she just like, I love this. At the end of the day, she's like, I love this. I love the work that I get to do. And the sense that she gets to heal with others. And that one line that really stood out to me, she's like, all those certificates and stuff on my wall didn't prepare me for this. My kapuna did, which is Hawaiian for my ancestors and those who came before her. And I just got chills thinking like, I want to feel that way. I want to feel like at the end of the day, I'm doing some sort of work that is both healing for me as well as my community, whatever that looks like. And I've never done the work specifically with this population, right? I've worked with adults that have severe mental illness in hospitals and stuff. And so one thing this one day before I dived into it, Jasmine was like, what if you specifically worked with like AAPI mothers or like maybe a little bit more niche so that you really feel this connection with the people you work with? And I was like, no, I don't know. But sometimes if you ignore the calling too much, it's just gonna like hit you in the face. And so I think that's what happened. And I was like, all right, I gotta do this. I gotta jump into it. It was such a pivotal moment. And then from the moment I said yes, I've been getting so many referrals. I'm basically like halfway to a full caseload already. And it's only been maybe a little over a month since I left my corporate job. So it just goes to show when you like say yes, the universe will show up.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
firmly believe that. And I'm so
Mhm.
excited that you are doing that because, like, as you know, growing up Asian American, mental health is not talked about at
Right.
all. Like,
Hmm.
it doesn't
Hmm.
exist. It's kind of like we experienced what males experience growing up, where
Hmm.
emotions are not supposed to be expressed or
Right.
talked about. Um, can you share with us more about that and how that's affected how you've experienced motherhood and even in your marriage?
Yeah. Yeah. I've always thought about mental health, even though clearly growing up with Taiwanese American parents, they never said not that they never, but they didn't often say I love you. If I can't even remember if they did. There was never, let's sit down and talk about our feelings. And I remember as a child, every time, my dad would get mad or there would be a family fight, no one would talk about it after. Even if you got in a fight or you got reprimanded or yelled at, no one said let's debrief or let's talk about what happened. It just kind of got swept under the rug after. But one thing I did a lot of as a kid was after those things happened, I would actually write a letter to my dad. So I think at a young age I was like, but I want to talk about this, like this isn't okay. And because he wouldn't talk about it in person, I took it upon myself. And I have always been really big on writing, and I love writing. I would write him like a letter. I'd literally type it up on our, big old chunky clunky computer back in the day. And I'd print it out and I'd stick it under his door. And he wouldn't even acknowledge it, but he had a bin that he would keep all our schoolwork and all these things in, and he kept every single one of those letters. And I remember when I discovered that I was like, our parents aren't talking about these things, but it does still matter, right? They're still also healing from their childhoods where it equally wasn't mentioned or talked about. Like, there's no way that my grandparents did the same, sat down, talked about their feelings. And so they're only working with what they know, but they're also aware of what they know may or may not have worked. And they're also aware that they're raising bicultural children, because my parents are born in Taiwan and I was born here in the States. And so they know that this is very different. Everything from the fact that they're not raising their children in the country that they grew up in, to the fact that their children, while bilingual, because I do speak Mandarin fluently, it's not as easy to talk. And there'd be times when you get heated, and next thing you know, you're kind of like screaming back at your parents in both English and Chinese. And I just imagine that like they're trying to do their best, but they only know so much because they haven't had that modeled. And then now that I'm a parent and I have the resources that my parents did in terms of accessing mental health care, as well as the schooling and the stuff, I don't even know if my parents had like psychology classes when they were younger and stuff. there's just a more heightened awareness of like the things that I do as a parent have long-term consequences and outcomes. And how am I setting my child up for success? Not just academic or career success, but as a whole, as a person, both emotionally, psychologically, mentally. And it's a lot of pressure though, then, because you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do things this specific way or whatever. But for me, that's also framed how I even communicate. Because I think for me, words and language is really important. And I actually made a conscious decision not to solely speak to my child in Mandarin, although a lot of my friends who are trying to raise bilingual kids will do that because they're like, well, I want them to learn and I'll only speak to them in Mandarin, and, you know, they'll speak English in school or whatnot. That'll help them. I remember thinking, I don't know how to express myself emotionally in Mandarin. I don't have the words. I want to help my child process his emotions and be able to talk about them, but I don't have the language for that. I don't know how to say those things. It doesn't come naturally to me. And so I made the conscious decision. He's just going to have to learn Chinese some other way, but I want to be able to speak to him about his feelings.
Oh my gosh, you just shared so much. And I can relate to all of it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
my parents, to my memory, have never told me they love me,
Mm-hmm.
right? I am Chinese American, Cantonese by culture. Um, and I'm pretty sure their I love you is, do you want any fruit? Are you okay? Do you need
Mm-hmm.
money?
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud of you. Things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I love you is not in their vocabulary. Um, and
Yeah.
that's just how it is, right? And then
Yeah.
also, you mentioned, like you're trying to teach your son, right? You want to teach him Mandarin, and you acknowledge that he's also American English speaking, and he's going to school, and he is going to be exposed to the American culture, even though you feel like you belong to two different cultures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as much as my Cantonese is limited because of my upbringing, like my parents are divorced. And so I was like raised by my mom, my dad, and my stepdad, who's Japanese American. So my my time to actually practice Cantonese shrunk as soon as my parents got remarried.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly couldn't even teach my kids about expressing themselves in Cantonese if it's not like really happy, really mad, just like very
Right.
basic
Right.
language when it comes to social emotional learning. And
Right.
I feel like, I don't know if that's just me being unaware that there are words that exist, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
the wheel of emotions. Like, does
Yeah.
something like that exist in Chinese? I have no idea. Maybe I'm just being ignorant, but I kind of feel like that doesn't exist because
Mm-hmm.
it's just not part of the culture, at least yet,
Mm-hmm.
to talk about your feelings, to do repair work,
Right.
to, like I did the same thing. I wrote my mom letters because
Mm.
she grew up not having her feelings acknowledged, not having her challenges and struggles acknowledged. And so her coping mechanism when she's uncomfortable with what's going on is to shut down. And so
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to get a word in. And I I love to communicate. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a good one back then, but I would literally write a letter, put it on her driver's seat so she would see it the next morning on her
Mm.
commute to work. Because
Mm-hmm.
I still had stuff to say, even though she wasn't comfortable with talking at the time. It's like, fine, you read this in your own time and you can respond when you feel like it. And like your dad, most times wouldn't address that I did that, but I knew that it was okay because she broke the ice in, you know,
Mm.
doing something nice for me, just something
Right.
indirectly to let me know that she's okay. She's moved on
Right.
from it.
Right.
And so I just think that's such a fascinating reflection of how I grew up, and looking at how I have struggled in my own ways with
Mm-hmm.
being a mother and not wanting to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
being a partner and not, like wanting to talk things through, wanting to do repair work, but not having the direct experience of
Mhm.
someone doing that for me. And I
Right.
struggled big time, which is a huge reason why I do what I do now, because I've done so much work on myself to
Mhm.
be able to work through my struggle. Like it literally
Right.
pained my body to speak about uncomfortable things because I felt like I
Yeah.
was going to die. Can you relate to that? Or like, have you heard from your clients about like how much it's a struggle to talk about hard things with their
Mhm.
partner and be able to have the capacity to handle their kids' tantrums? And, like, because
Mm.
anger is like,
Mhm.
nope, can't do that.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that sticks out to me about what you're sharing is especially how other people's behaviors will trigger us because of what we were like not allowed to feel as children. So a great example is like when your kids are crying and fussing and you try to comfort them but they're still fussing and suddenly you just have no patience for it. And a lot of times it's important to step back and be like, I wonder if this is because when we were this age and throwing this exact same type of tantrum, we were reprimanded. We were told we were being
Hmm.
bad. We were shut down. And now we are in the flip side of it, and our child is doing the same thing. And it can trigger us. It can trigger us because we, growing up for many years until you're like a teenager or adult or whatever, or even now, so maybe that's still happening now with our parents, told again and again and again, stop crying, or like, look what you did. Like, and so we just internalize that this is bad, this is wrong. Or you think about how, like, if you're having strong emotions around someone else, you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm crying or something, right? For so long,
Hmm.
we were shut down every time we had a big emotion. And so now it's like this repair work of being like, you're safe. You're safe to have this emotion. And how do you do that with your child? How do you do that and hold space? Because that's the other hard part is when your child is having this tantrum or when you're in a fight with your partner, it's reminding yourself that this is okay and that we can hold space for it. But that's a lot of unlearning to do because all our formative years we were told like this is wrong, this is bad, avoid it, right? Or a lot of times my mom's like, I just want you guys to be happy. So there's this almost like toxic positivity that gets
Hmm.
focused on so that any kind of feeling is labeled bad or wrong. And so when you feel it, you feel shame or you feel like, I just want this anxiety to go away or I want this, whatever the strong feelings to go away. And then some people either like suppress it or they find, like maladaptive coping skills to just try to make it go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know about Taiwanese culture, but I know in Chinese culture, it's huge
Mm-hmm.
with blaming. So, like, if I did something and made a mistake because I was a kid, a huge, like, lesson for me to learn as a mother is like, I have to let my kids be kids and I
Mm-hmm.
can't criticize them for every mistake they're making because they're literally brand new and they're learning with
Mm-hmm.
like everything that they do. And they're not doing things on purpose to make me mad or frustrate me, which is how I felt as a kid. It's like anytime
Mm-hmm.
I messed up, I was
Mm-hmm.
made to feel like I did it on purpose to inconvenience
Mm-hmm.
my parents or
Mm-hmm.
upset them. And so it's really interesting to like be on the flip side and be like, oh shoot, I am being like them now. And that's not how I want to be. And so when I
Yeah.
first came across the term reparenting, my
Mm-hmm.
life was like turned upside down. I was like, what? Like, we
Mm-hmm.
can heal ourselves? This is incredible. We don't have to perpetuate this like trauma that we've been
Yeah.
through and this cycle of
Mm-hmm.
blame culture and not taking accountability for our feelings and not owning our part in it and
Mm-hmm.
being able to fully step into that role of parent and like, oh, I'm the
Mm-hmm.
mature one. Oh, right. Okay. So if
Yeah.
I don't have the patience for this, then how can I go and grow my patience and
Mm-hmm.
increase my capacity rather than just unleash my wrath on my kid for nothing that they're really doing on purpose. They're just being
Right.
themselves.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's something I see in common with a lot of children of immigrants, adult children of immigrants, is that there is a tendency to develop codependent relationships because at a young age we were told we were responsible, and not outwardly totally responsible for our parents' feelings or emotions or reactions, but we were, like you said, blamed. Dad gets mad about something and it's like, look what you did,
Mm.
right? And suddenly we internalize that we actually have the responsibility of whether or not our parent is mad, happy, sad, or whatever. And that we have to walk on eggshells or watch our behavior because anything we do could set off, versus the healthy thing to do is we are all responsible for our own emotions and we're not responsible for other people's emotions. But that's something we learn at a really young age when we have parents that are at a young age going to say, like, you did this or you did that. And then that, like you said, that process of reparenting, a lot of it is kind of going back and trying to heal that inner child and letting yourself know, I was not responsible. I was not to blame. And that can be hard to do on your own. And sometimes it still plays out like in relationship with your partners. And I definitely see
Mm-hmm.
that a lot too, is like, it's not just with the healing with your parenting, but also with your partner, because it's very similar. You're also going to be mirroring the kind of relationships you saw. So we only can do what we've learned or raised with. So if we see like this is what the power dynamic was between mom and me, but then also this was the dynamic between my parents, and we just kind of copy that unless we take a conscious
Yep.
effort to work on it.
Yeah. And it's that
Yeah.
conscious effort that really makes the difference,
Mm-hmm.
because it does take energy. It does take like effort for
Yeah.
you to change your habits, because that's what it really is. It's a habit. It's not who you are. You weren't born
Yeah.
like that. Although I would say that some trauma does get passed on, but
Mm-hmm.
all these habits we picked up on can be unlearned. Is it
Yeah.
easy? Hell no. It is not easy,
Mm-hmm.
but I would argue to say it is probably the most worthwhile thing that I've
Mm-hmm.
done for myself in my family. Period.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no one can tell me anything different. And
Yeah.
just knowing now that we are each responsible for our own emotions, it doesn't mean that you're going to go back and rewrite your story and say, I have some fucked up parents and they were
Mm-hmm.
so mean to me. We don't have to say that. We could just be
Mm-hmm.
like, they did their best. I wonder
Yeah.
what their childhood was like for them to
Yes.
end up parenting me like that. That must have been really hard, because I
Mm-hmm.
firmly believe every generation gets better.
Yeah.
However, when we choose to consciously work on ourselves, we get
Mm-hmm.
to leapfrog a little bit, right? We don't have to just go from version 1 to 1.1. We can go from 1 to 2 to 3 to
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like, it literally is up to you how much you want to put into it, but it's going to
Yeah.
come out so beautifully and create this massive ripple effect, because now, like, my daughter, she is a screamer, okay? And that triggers the shit out of me, okay? And most times I can handle it. I can just sit there and just write it out, because I know her patterns and I know at what point it's okay to talk to her. And I know that, like, talking over her is just going to make her louder and fight me harder. So I just learn to accept it. But
Mm-hmm.
just reflecting back, the fact that I can do that now is incredible.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really glad she's my third child and not my first,
Mm-hmm.
because had she been my first, I would have messed her up so bad, because I didn't have that capacity in myself to handle uncomfortable emotions, to be able to react to that triggering event with so much grace and compassion. I would just be like, shut up. And I would lose my mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful. And also, I'm so sorry to my oldest, because I was only doing my best. And I'm really sorry you were our guinea pig, but that's just how it is.
And two things can be true, right? We can, when you said, oh man, I would have messed her up. But the reality is, we continue to do that healing work with our kids. So, like, even if we,
Absolutely.
for the firstborn, was like yelled and screamed and did all these things that looking back, we're like, oh man, I can't believe I did that. They are still able to learn and heal together. And it's really that repair work that we can even do
Mm-hmm.
today. It's never too late to repair with your kids. Like, even with my parents, Like at one point, this is very rare with Asian families, but we all went to family therapy as adults. My
What?
sister, yes, myself, and my parents. And it wasn't
I am
like this
amazed.
magical, I know, it wasn't like a magical epiphany where we were all like, yay, now we're all better. But it's a sign that it's never too late to do the repair work. So, like, even if we are still on this journey of reparenting and healing our generational trauma, and you're like, oh, but my 8-year-old, when I was, did this with that or whatever, there's still so much room for repair. And that is actually the most important part. It's not about what we do in those moments, because that kind of stuff can really drive us mad, where we're like, I need to be this perfect parent who is like really responsive and aware of this and that. And that's just not sustainable, because at the end of the day, we're human. And in the
Yes.
same ways that our parents tried their best, we're still trying our best. But I think the bigger piece is, how are we going back and doing that repair work with them in the now, in the moment? And how are we having the conversations and not sweeping it under the rug, right? Because there are going to be days where we lose our cool, we lose our patience, and our old trauma comes back and gets us, and we are triggered by something. But there's always going to be those cool down moments, those moments that we may not have had with our parents, or we did, in the form of like, do you want oranges now? Or like when they tried to show their love through, because my dad did that too. I'd send him the letter under the door. The next day he'd come by and like kind of sheepishly be like, do you want to go get McDonald's? I know you like the fish
Uh-huh.
fillet or whatever it was that I liked at the time.
It's always
And that was,
food for some reason.
I know. I'm sure there's some study why like these cultures have a more like a food driven sign of love, but our parents were doing that repair work too. They just didn't know how to meet us and that repair. And in some level back then, we
Yes.
also, like you said, you felt like, okay, she received my letter, she got it, we're back. And so there was still that repair work happening. Was it the best repair work? But I think in the same way, we can still continue to do that repair work when we do lose our cool with our kids.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we can't apologize to them
Mm-hmm.
means we've already broken through the mold, because I do feel
Yeah.
like Asian cultures, and a lot of others too, do have a huge sense of pride in
Yes.
how they navigate the world, for good or for bad,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe even
Yeah.
a little bit of both. And I
Yeah.
really think that that's the main part of it, is like,
Mm-hmm.
it is uncomfortable to acknowledge that you did something wrong, because as we grew up, if we did something wrong or made a mistake, we
Mm-hmm.
internalized that we were bad. And
Yeah.
so admitting that we're bad, like if we're going to say that we're bad, like that's just like game over. Like we're just
Mm-hmm.
screwed for the rest of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a lot for me to come to terms and make peace with apologizing to other people,
Mm-hmm.
especially in
Mm-hmm.
romantic relationships, especially to my kids, where
Mm-hmm.
I've grown up. It's like the parent is right. Like there's that hierarchy. It's like, no,
Yeah.
you have to respect me. Don't you dare, do this, or, not admit you're wrong or whatever. And now it's like the shift in how we view parenting. And I don't even think this is just like a cultural thing. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
even American families are also going through this shift, where we are now viewing our kids as just tiny humans like us.
Yes.
We're all
Yes. Yeah.
learning, we all make mistakes, and we don't have to project this thing where it's like, oh, as an adult, like you've learned it all. There's nothing for us to learn at all. And, we're perfect, and only you do wrong stuff. Only you have to
Mm-hmm.
apologize. Only you, are inferior, essentially. But now it's
Yeah.
like, no, we fuck up too. We own it. We can apologize to you just as much as you can apologize to us. And
Mm-hmm.
the connection potential is so much stronger because of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think our parents' generation, it's a lot of, you see children as like second class humans. They're like
Oh,
little
yeah.
pets almost, instead of being like, this little being is going to become an adult human one day. And there's a shift of like, and I think it's also based on the filial piety that is baked into a lot of Eastern cultures of like, you are to be seen and not heard. I am to be honored and
Yes.
obeyed, versus like, I like the shift of like, as a parent, I am actually developing you as a future human being. I've had people who, uh, who don't have kids have been like try to compare kids to like pets and dogs and stuff, which I'm like, and I think they're well meaning and it's not no fault of their own, but it's at the end of the day, it's like, no, because your dog just stays a dog forever.
Right.
Like my
Yeah.
like toddler, while there's some behavioral things, quotes, air quotes, of that you're trying to work on and correct, they will become an adult human one day. And so what you're teaching them now at this age isn't the same as like, I'm going to teach my dog not to chew up the furniture and, you know, do X, Y, and Z. Your dog is just going to be a dog for the rest of their life, but your child will become a functioning human in society. What are the skills you're teaching them at that age versus like, no, bad dog kind of reaction to children? But that's how we were
Yeah.
raised. We were kind of like really just, it was very black and white of like, these are things, like you said, there's good feelings and bad feelings, good behavior and bad behavior. You're a good child or a bad child. And it's really not that way at all.
No, I think just throughout this journey, I've learned to live in the world of gray more rather than black
Mm-hmm.
and white. It's either you're
Mm-hmm.
like on point or you're not on point and you're in trouble, where it's like, no, we can see our perspective and understand why things triggered us in, with our child or with our partner.
Mm-hmm.
And we can also take a look at their perspective and understand, like, oh, I understand why you did that now. I
Mm-hmm.
don't
Mm-hmm.
agree with it, but I can understand how you got there and give them grace and compassion and work through things.
Yeah.
Whereas, when we're operating in black and white, where it's like, I'm right, you're wrong, there is
Right.
no winning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you
Mm-hmm.
grow up with that, where it's like, I'm the parent, I'm right, you're the child, you're wrong. Doesn't matter what you think, what you're experiencing, what you think you saw, like, it's just whatever I feel like is right is what's right. And as a therapist, our minds are flawed, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
biased towards what we believe in that current moment. And so it's going to pick up on different things and confirm that we are right in how we feel and vindicate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now that we know, like, no, the mind literally is trying to be your biggest cheerleader for better or worse, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't serve us very well, right? It
Yeah.
closes us off. It doesn't leave us to be open minded in a world where it cultivates connection and relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
so, unless you're aware of that and you know to challenge that thought after you've
Mm-hmm.
let it run its course, you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
stuck limiting the potential of your relationship with your child and with your partner. And it's just really
Mm-hmm.
sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I want to dive back into how our cultures have affected how we express affection in our journey as moms. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but like, it was hard for me to say I love you to my stepson because he came
Mm-hmm.
first, obviously, right? So he's a teenager now, but my husband's family is like, he's white, so he's American, very affectionate people. Hug all the time, say I love you multiple times a day, and very like verbally affirming. And that was like the complete opposite of what I came from. It's like I
Mm-hmm.
rarely got compliments. I got more criticisms than I got
Mm-hmm.
compliments. And never heard I love you, never heard my parents say I love you, probably saw them hold hands and kiss a handful of times. And so I was like, what is happening right now? Right. So it was really different from me. What is this something that you could relate to or have seen or heard from your clients? And what are some ways that you've helped yourself and others navigate this difference in culture?
Yeah. This is one where I feel like it's very dependent on each individual because I am
Mm-hmm.
very, very physically affectionate. I've always really needed like words of affirmation as a love language. Physical touch is my love language. I'm always like seeking that. I'm always seeking I need to sit close to you, or I want to be cuddling with my son or my husband. Um, and so even though I didn't get that growing up, it's something I wanted and yearned. I think that's where it's
Mm.
unique to each individual. So I think this can actually span culture. I think while there is like a cultural tendency, I think especially among Asian American Pacific Islanders to maybe not be as outwardly or physically affectionate, I wonder if part of it is just because there's a lot of being very private, right? You don't like put yourself out there. You're very reserved in a lot of Eastern cultures. And so that kind of stuff is kept under wraps or kept kind of hidden. But it doesn't mean the need isn't there. And I wonder too if behind closed doors, there's more people just really seeking that and wanting that. Because I knew growing up, even though I did not get that a lot at all, I was always very like, I want to be very affectionate. I want like a hug, and I need this, and scratch my back, mommy, and stuff like that. Like I was always doing that. And my mom's like, oh my gosh. And so I think for some people, this is where I think that like there's probably even families like that are like not like people of color that are not affectionate. Well, I think this is unique to certain people, but especially in our culture, it's just not as widely accepted or whatever. So there is this challenge of like balancing what are just some people's individual needs. Like some people just really do need more physical affection or verbal affection. Some people don't. But there's that extra barrier of how do we go past that? If let's say you have a partnership where one of you really, that's their love language, they really want to have more physical affection and verbal affection, and the other person just like didn't grow up that way, and that's just not that's not how they feel connection. I think that that's okay. And two things can be true, right? Like your partner may still want that need, right? Like I feel most loved if you write me a card and tell me that you love me. Well, the partner is like, I feel like I show my love by like cleaning the house for you or picking up groceries for you, right? That's a lot of what like my dad was like. I don't know, maybe that's very common Asian dad love language, like you said, bring them the stuff, and like learning at some point that that is the best I'm going to get, at least from my dad. Like he's not going to initiate the physical affection. He's not going to initiate the words of affirmation, but also starting to pivot to see like, okay, how are people showing me love? And if you are a partner, because I think with parent relationships different, I think there is that open conversation of like, I like just being advocating for yourself of like, I do feel more loved if you, I don't know, just like hold my hand right now, or do like kind of having to initiate kind of asking for it, because people don't know. And if this is for all their life, this is how they've learned to show love and affection, and this is the way that they receive love and affection, how do you meet in the middle, right? So maybe for your partner, it's like, I actually don't like being touched. Like my husband doesn't like massages. He's just not a very touchy person. And so I would never do that. Right? Like kidding. I love massages. Sign me up for massages. Right? But like, I would never be like, no, this is how I show affection. I'm going to massage the crap out of you. Right? Like that's not going to work. Right? If that's just how he's built. But recognizing that like, for me, it'd be really nice if you do this. And then also shifting it like, okay, how does he feel loved? For him, if like feels so loved if I like clean the kitchen. And this is not to be some sort of like patriarchal thing. He's a very clean freak. He loves cleaning. And so in our dynamic, I'm not really doing that. So like, how do I meet him in a way where like, this is where he feels loved? So I don't think it necessarily means that like folks that are not physically affectionate have to start like learning how to receive it, but I think they can learn how to give it. Like, I think that's the part that is a little bit more flexible. Because I think also when it comes to physical affection, we also have to be mindful of any kind of past trauma about physical touch. And so if a lot of children of immigrants maybe, and not necessarily children of immigrants, but I just think of like a lot of any kind of physical abuse or like spanking or anything. And so a lot of times the only, especially in Asian families that were not affectionate, if the only times you were being touched by your parents was because they were hitting you or spanking you or reprimanding you, you're not going to associate touch a lot of times with like love and comfort and stuff. And so being mindful of that and recognizing that maybe you won't necessarily be able to give it to them that way, but if they can be open about giving it, because it's a little different that way. It's like, I'm not going to force them to be like, you have to let me hold you and kiss you and smother you. Right. But if my needs are, I really do need to have some physical affection. If the compromise is like, okay, I'll like, you know, maybe when we're watching Netflix after the kid goes to bed, I just need you to rub my back, or like, you know, like massage my feet or something like that. And so I think there's the compromise of like, as the person who maybe isn't as physically affectionate and not comfortable with receiving it, how can you give it?
Yeah, I think just going for impact, right? Like, is what I'm doing having the impact that I want it to? Because as parents, we're already trying to figure out how to make it out of here alive while sometimes enjoying it, right? And so you want to make sure that what you're devoting your energy into is actually paying off, right? Like, because I can say, okay, yeah, acts of service all day, but if my partner's like, no, I don't really give a shit about that, I want gifts, then it doesn't really matter how many toilets I clean or whatever. Like, he wants a present. I mean, thank goodness that's not his, because that's like the lowest on my list for him. And it is very convenient that we are almost identical in the way our love languages are ranked. And so that's very nice. But I will say that it was definitely a growing moment for me to kind of like be feeling safe to say I love you. And now, like with my kids, it's like I say that shit all day, all the time, making sure they know that I value them, how special they are to me. And I try and compliment them a lot because, you know, I've learned just through the Gottman Institute, it's like for every criticism, kids need a shit ton of praise. And same for our partners, but not as much because we're adults, right? But I want to make sure at the end of the day, they know they're loved. And I think one huge thing that I had to learn the hard way was I have to consider what I'm doing and how it's going to affect them. So even when I'm upset about what they did and how it affected me, I need to watch how I deliver the message and what is my intention behind that. Whereas what I learned growing up, what I was modeled was, no, you pissed me off. So I'm just going to say what I feel right now, unfiltered, without processing anything or taking any personal responsibility for my emotions. And I'm going to dump it on you. Right. And so I had to really realize, like, oh, do I want to send my son to school wondering if I love him? Absolutely not. And when I really like put it into that perspective, I was like, shit, okay, let me simmer down. Let me like process how I feel. Let me settle. And then let me ask myself, well, what about that upset me? And what is it that I need going forward? And how do I want him to feel, or my daughter, right? How do I want them to feel after I deliver this message of mine? And I think that is like missed in our upbringing.
Yeah. Very reactive versus like reflective.
And like you said, we were treated like second class citizens, and that was just the norm. I don't think they did it to make our childhood shitty. I mean, obviously there were good parts too, but I think just reflecting like, wow, we have been dealt a hand where we've really had to go against the grain and what feels natural to us in our minds and our bodies to be able to get to this point. And I'm just going to give us like a pat on the back, like a huge, because it's hard fucking work.
Yeah.
So anyway, I could talk to you forever. This is basically like our whole lives that we've dealt with, and us trying to work through it and not repeat it. Can you share with our listeners where they can find you? Can you tell them about your podcast, which I love the name?
Yes. So I am on Psychology Today. If people are interested in seeing me as a therapist, I can only see people who are in the state of California, but I do virtual. So anywhere in California, I'm only licensed to see. I can be found on Instagram at Healing with Peggy, which was a play on the title of our podcast, Healing the Tigress. And the name, it's so funny that the whole reason why we came up with that name was actually kind of a nod to the battle hymn of the Tiger Mom. Have you read that book? And how that is basically how we were all raised. I remember reading it and getting really angry because I was like, God, this is so triggering. And we want to heal from that, right? We want to heal from this type of mentality that the mental health of your children and yourself doesn't matter. So that's what the podcast is about, is just looking at mental health, specifically in motherhood. So it's focusing on maternal mental health, but it's not just perinatal. It's not just postpartum. We've had some episodes about parenting. We've had some episodes with dads. So there's a lot, but it's really creating a space for Asian American Pacific Islanders to talk about their mental health, especially in the context of parenthood and motherhood. We're on Instagram at Healing the Tigress, as well as every podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find us. And that's that.
Awesome. Okay. Before I let you go, I love to ask guests a question so that listeners can get to know you better. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. So, what is something that you experienced early in your journey in becoming a mom that you're like, oh shit, like I'm totally being like my mom right now? Like not in a proud way, but like in a cringe way.
I would 100% say it was the postpartum anxiety. My mom was and is a very anxious person. And that was
Same.
something that I totally see painted a lot of my pregnancy, a lot of postpartum was just a lot of anxiety, a lot of worrying about 10 million things, and how that kind of anxiety played a role in me letting my son as a baby do a lot of things. He'd be like, oh, watch out for this. Oh, that's kind of hovering. And so I feel like it's funny because my mom also helped out with us when he was a baby, and I saw her doing all those things, and I would call her out on it and be like, just let him. Or she would, it was in the middle of the pandemic, she would wipe his hands a ton. We got all these little alcohol wipes, which probably have those forever chemicals. I'm going to just let that one go. But she was like wiping his hands constantly after everything because COVID and all this stuff. And I remember I was trying to do baby-led weaning. And I was like, you just stop wiping his hands. Because I was like, he's fine. He needs to get a little bit dirty or whatever. But at the same time, I would get really paranoid about all these other things and be like, no, he needs this. What is this cough about? Is what are like every little thing that he was experiencing, it would blow up in my mind. And then doing that on next to my mom, like, oh my gosh, I'm being her. I'm like, I need to chill. I feel like, and I hope so, that I have chilled out since then, since postpartum. I mean, I actually ended up seeing a few perinatal mental health therapists in the midst of my postpartum. And so that really helped. And I continue to see therapy. I see therapy a little bit less now because I'm trying to juggle my own caseload. And I do feel like I've made strides in my anxiety. But that was definitely something that I was like, just like my mom, I am so anxious about all these things, and I need to let him breathe. I need to step back a little.
Yes. Gotta let him be a kid, which is so hard when we didn't feel like we were allowed to be a kid. I don't know about your experience, but I definitely don't feel like I was allowed to be a kid.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you so much for being on the show. Like,
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so thrilled to hear back from you listeners about what your favorite part about this episode was, whether you're also Asian American or you're a different culture and you could relate to a lot of what we're saying. Please reach out to us. Let us know, because this is one-sided. Like, we have no idea who's going to end up listening to this. So reach out, let us know what resonated, because we always love to hear back from you listeners. And if you live in California and want to see Peggy, go check out her website and sign up to be a client of hers. But definitely, wherever you are, go check out her podcast, because I'm sure that you will get a lot out of that. I know I added that to my list of favorite podcasts to check out regularly. And if you love this episode and you know someone that could benefit from hearing this, please share. And if you love this show, please leave a rating and review and hit subscribe or follow, whatever your platform says to do, so that you don't miss any episodes, okay? I will catch you back here on the next episode, and see you later. Bye. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please send me a message over on Instagram at Michelle Perta Coaching to let me know what you loved most about it. Hearing from my listeners is my absolute favorite. And if you've been loving this podcast, please leave a rating and review. This will help people like you find the show and get the help they need. Catch you here on the next episode. Bye.